He was not supposed to survive the rain, and somehow, even with his body failing, the German shepherd kept his paw over the old canvas bag like it was the last order he had been given. The gas station had been closed for years, nothing left but rusted pumps, cracked asphalt, and a flickering security light that buzzed above the empty lot like a tired insect. Cold rain swept across rural Virginia in silver sheets, running down the faded sign, pooling in the potholes, turning the roadside ditch into a ribbon of black mud. Cars passed on the highway without slowing. Their headlights flashed over him for half a second at a time, just long enough to show the shape of a dog lying near the weeds, then vanished into the dark as if they had seen nothing at all. He did not lift his head for them anymore. He had tried. Maybe hours ago. Maybe days. Time had become the space between one weak breath and the next. His coat, once sable and proud, clung to his ribs in wet patches. His ears trembled at every gust of wind. Around his neck hung the torn remains of an old working collar, the faded stitching almost swallowed by mud. One strip of cloth still showed 3 letters, K9, stitched in dull gold thread. Beneath his chest, half hidden by his front legs, was the canvas bag. It was small, military green, worn soft at the edges, darkened by rain. Every time the wind shifted it or the water tugged at its strap, the dog dragged himself over it again. Not fast, not strong, just enough. A promise made with the last strength in his bones. A semi rolled by on the highway, sending a wave of water across the shoulder. The dog flinched but did not move away. From somewhere behind the building, a loose piece of tin knocked against the wall. The sound echoed across the empty lot. He opened his amber eyes, cloudy with exhaustion, and listened. Nothing. Only rain. Only the distant hum of tires. Only the lonely, hollow world of a place people had forgotten. Then, just before midnight, a dark pickup slowed near the exit ramp. Its headlights swept across the station, catching the rusted pumps, the weeds growing through concrete, the broken glass beneath the office window. The driver almost kept going. He had already driven nearly 80 miles that night, hands stiff on the wheel, dress uniform jacket hanging from the passenger seat, a folded memorial program tucked beside it. Staff Sergeant Caleb Walker had not planned to stop. He had not planned to speak to anyone. He had spent the evening standing beneath a flag at a small military chapel, listening to names read aloud, including the one that still lived like a stone behind his ribs. Lieutenant Aaron Walker. Missing 7 years. Presumed gone. No final goodbye. No grave that felt true. Caleb had left before the coffee, before the handshakes, before strangers could place soft hands on his shoulder and say things meant to comfort a wound they could not see. He was 37 now, tall, broad-shouldered, with short brown hair damp from the storm and gray-blue eyes that still scanned exits before they noticed sunsets. His face carried the quiet discipline of a Marine, but tonight it also carried something heavier. The kind of grief that does not collapse. It stands. It drives. It breathes through clenched teeth and calls that survival. He pulled into the abandoned lot only because his fuel light had come on, forgetting the station had closed years ago. The tires crunched over broken gravel. The headlights swung toward the ditch. For one brief second, he saw the eyes. Caleb hit the brakes. The truck stopped hard, engine rumbling in the rain. He leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. At first, he thought it was a deer. Then the shape shifted. A muzzle. A torn ear. A paw pressed over something green. Caleb's hand moved before his mind caught up. He grabbed a flashlight from the console and stepped out into the storm. The cold rain struck his face, slid under his collar, soaked through his shirt within seconds. He walked slowly, boots splashing through shallow water. The beam of light trembled across the ditch and found the dog fully now. German shepherd. Male. Older. Bad shape. Still watching. Caleb stopped 6 feet away. The dog gave a low sound, not a bark, not quite a growl. It was thin and broken, but it carried a warning. Not for himself. For the bag. Caleb lowered the flashlight so it would not blind him. "Easy, boy," he said, his voice rough from a night of saying nothing. "I see you." The dog's chest rose, fell, then paused too long before rising again. Caleb knelt in the mud, careful, slow, the way he had once approached frightened young Marines after bad news. "I'm not here to take it from you." The dog's eyes narrowed. Rain streamed down his muzzle. Caleb noticed the collar then, The faded K, 9 letters, the worn place where a tag should have hung, the old training scars of harness and duty. This was not a stray that had simply lost his way. This was a working dog. Or he had been. Caleb's throat tightened. "Who left you out here?" he whispered. The dog tried to lift his head and failed. His paw slid off the canvas bag. Instantly, with a weak shudder, he dragged it back into place. Caleb froze. That small motion told him everything. The dog was not waiting to be saved. He was guarding something. The rain softened for a moment, as if even the storm had leaned in to listen. Caleb reached up and pulled the chain from beneath his shirt. His own dog tags rested warm against his palm, marked by years of skin and sweat and prayerless nights. He held them out, letting the metal catch the faint light. "Walker," he said quietly. "Staff Sergeant Caleb Walker, United States Marine Corps." The dog's nostrils twitched. Once, twice. Something changed in his eyes. Not recognition exactly. Something older than recognition. Scent. Memory. Blood. The weak growl faded into a trembling breath. Caleb moved closer, inch by inch. The dog did not fight this time. He only watched, as if measuring the man's soul against a name he had carried through rain, hunger, and whatever long road had led him here. Caleb slipped off his field jacket and spread it open in the mud. The dog flinched when Caleb's hands touched him, then went still. He was lighter than he should have been. Too light. Caleb slid one arm beneath his chest and the other under his hips. The canvas bag shifted, and the dog's head jerked toward it in panic. "I've got it," Caleb said. "I've got your bag too." He looped the strap over his wrist, then lifted the shepherd against his chest. The dog let out one small sound, almost a sigh, and pressed his wet muzzle against Caleb's dog tags. For a second, the Marine stood in the rain without moving. The abandoned station flickered behind him. The highway hissed in the distance. In his arms, the dying K9 guarded a secret Caleb did not yet understand. But the weight of him, the trust of him, felt like a door opening somewhere in the dark. Caleb turned toward the truck, holding him tighter. "You made it this far," he murmured. "Don't quit on me now." Caleb laid the German shepherd across the back seat with the care of a man handling something sacred, not fragile, sacred. Rainwater streamed from the dog's coat onto the rubber floor mats, carrying the smell of mud, cold metal, and old fear into the cab. The canvas bag stayed looped around Caleb's wrist until he set it beside the dog's front paws. Even half-conscious, the shepherd shifted toward it, nose brushing the strap, one trembling paw landing over the damp fabric again. Caleb saw it and felt the quiet warning in his chest. Whatever was inside mattered more to this dog than his own pain. He shut the rear door softly and climbed behind the wheel. The truck heater groaned to life, pushing weak warmth through the vents. His hands were slick from rain as he grabbed his phone and searched for the nearest emergency veterinary clinic. The first number rang until it went to voicemail. The second had closed at 10. The third answered on the fourth ring, a tired woman's voice nearly swallowed by static. "Carter Animal Emergency, this is Emily." Caleb looked at the dog through the rearview mirror. The shepherd's eyes were open, fixed on him, bright and fading at the same time. "My name is Staff Sergeant Caleb Walker," he said, each word held steady by discipline alone. "I found a German Shepherd K9 off Route 17 near the old Mill Creek gas station. He is alive, but barely. I am about 20 minutes out." There was a pause, then the voice sharpened. "Is he breathing on his own?" Caleb checked the mirror again. One breath, then another, too slow. "Yes, ma'am. Weak. Keep him warm. Do not give food or water. Drive safe, but get here." Caleb shifted into gear. "We are coming." The road unrolled ahead in narrow lanes of wet blacktop, bordered by winter trees and low fields washed pale by moonless rain. The wipers moved back and forth like a tired metronome. Every few seconds, Caleb glanced into the mirror, counting the rise of the dog's ribs. 1, 2, wait, 3. He had counted breaths before in places far from home, under skies full of dust and noise, but this was different. This was a lonely county road in Virginia. This wall. Caleb stood beside the exam table while the old wall clock moved past 1 in the morning, each tick small and stubborn against the hum of oxygen and the soft whisper of rain against the clinic windows. The German shepherd lay beneath 2 warmed blankets, his sable fur drying in uneven waves, his chest rising with the careful rhythm of a creature still deciding whether the world was worth trusting. Dr. Emily Carter worked without wasting emotion. She placed a clear line of fluids, checked his temperature, listened to his lungs, and spoke to him in the quiet voice of someone who had learned long ago that animals hear more than words. "Easy, handsome," she murmured. "You made it through the hard part of the door. Now let us help you through the rest." Caleb watched the dog's paw. Even under the blanket, it stayed curled toward the canvas bag, as if some invisible command still held him there. The bag sat on a clean towel at the edge of the steel table, dripping less now, its military green fabric dark in the fluorescent light. Mud clung to the seams. The faded letters on one side seemed to shift every time Caleb looked away and back again. W, maybe A. Maybe nothing but the mind making ghosts out of stains. He wanted to open it. He did not want to open it. Both feelings pressed against his ribs with equal force. Emily must have sensed the battle in him, because she did not push. She only checked the shepherd's heartbeat again and said, "He is responding to warmth." "That is something." Caleb looked at her. "Something enough?" Emily's eyes softened, but she did not lie. "Something for now." The technician, a young man named Peter with tired eyes and kind hands, brought more towels and set them near the table. "No microchip showed on the first scan," he said. "I can try again once he is more stable." Caleb nodded, though his attention had returned to the collar remnant around the dog's neck. It had been cut away carefully and placed beside the bag. The strip was cracked, stained by weather, and worn almost smooth from years of use. On the inside edge, hidden beneath a fold, something had been stitched in black thread. Emily noticed Caleb staring and lifted it gently under the light. "There is a name here." Caleb stepped closer. The letters were faded, but not gone. R-A-N-G-E-R. The room seemed to narrow around that word. Caleb repeated it under his breath. "Ranger." The dog's ear flicked. Not much, just a quick pull toward sound. But everyone saw it. Peter froze with the towel in his hands. Emily looked from the collar to the dog, then back to Caleb. "Say it again." Caleb leaned closer, careful not to crowd him. "Ranger." This time the shepherd's eyes opened halfway, clouded, exhausted, but present. His gaze found Caleb's face, then drifted to the metal chain at Caleb's chest. The dog made a small sound, a broken breath shaped almost like recognition. Caleb felt the hairs rise along his arms. "You know that name," he whispered. Ranger's nose moved. He was trying to smell through antiseptic and rain and his own weakness. Caleb pulled his dog tags out from under his wet shirt and held them lower. The metal swung once, catching the light. Ranger lifted his muzzle less than an inch, then let it fall, but the message was clear. He knew the scent of those tags, or something close to them. Emily spoke gently. "Staff Sergeant, has your family ever handled working dogs?" Caleb did not answer right away. He kept his eyes on Ranger, and the clinic faded into another night, 7 years earlier, when Aaron had called him from a training facility in North Carolina with wind in the phone and laughter in his voice. He had said the dog they assigned him was stubborn, brilliant, and too proud to admit he liked people. He had said the dog watched him like he was reading his sins and forgiving him anyway. Caleb had teased him, asked if the Marine had finally met someone harder to impress than their father. Aaron had laughed. Then he had said the name. Ranger. Caleb's hand tightened around his own tags. The memory struck quietly, without mercy. He turned toward the canvas bag. "My brother had a K-9 named Ranger," he said. Emily went still. "Had?" Caleb swallowed. "Lieutenant Aaron Walker. He disappeared during a training transfer 7 years ago. Bad storm, vehicle accident near a rural route. Records got messy, search went cold. They found some gear washed out near a creek. They never found him." The words came out clean, practiced by years of explaining what could not be explained. But his voice changed at the end. It always did. Ranger breathed under the blankets, the sound thin but steady. Emily looked at the dog with new understanding, as if a second patient had entered the room, one made of memory. "And the dog?" Caleb shook his head. "Listed missing too. Later presumed lost." Peter crossed himself softly, maybe without realizing it. The rain outside eased, leaving the clinic wrapped in a heavy silence. Caleb reached for the bag. This time Ranger did not tense. His paw shifted once beneath the blanket, then settled. Caleb took that as permission. He unbuckled the strap, the metal clasp stiff with rust. The first thing inside was a strip of folded cloth, dry in the center where the bag had protected it. It looked like part of an old Marine Corps field shirt. Beneath it lay a plastic sleeve clouded by age. Caleb slid it free and wiped the outside with his thumb. Inside was a photograph, water-damaged but still visible. A younger Aaron stood beside a German shepherd on a gravel training field, one hand resting between the dog's ears, both of them looking off camera as if someone had called their names at the same time. Caleb stopped breathing. The dog in the picture was leaner, younger, proud in the shoulders and bright in the eyes. But the face was the same dark saddle, the same amber stare, the same quiet judgment softened by loyalty. Ranger. Emily said nothing. Peter stepped back. Caleb set the photo on the towel as if it might break. His fingers returned to the bag and touched something cold at the bottom. A metal tag. Not Caleb's. Not Ranger's. He pulled it into the light. Mud filled the stamped letters, and for one strange second, he could not make them out. Then Emily handed him a gauze pad. Caleb wiped once, slowly. The name appeared like a voice rising from deep water. Walker. Aaron M. Caleb's face tightened, but he did not cry. Not yet. He simply closed his hand around the tag and lowered his head. On the table, Ranger opened his eyes again. This time, he was looking directly at Caleb. Not at the bag. Not at the room. At Caleb. As if the dog had crossed 7 years, miles of storm roads, hunger, fear, and fading strength for this one moment. Caleb leaned close, the tag warm now in his palm. You brought him home, he whispered. Ranger's tail moved beneath the blanket. Once. So faint it could have been imagined. But Emily saw it. Caleb saw it. And in that small movement, the room changed. The dying dog was no longer just a rescue. He was a witness. A messenger. The last living bridge between two brothers separated by silence. Then Ranger's breathing hitched, and Emily's expression sharpened. The monitor beside the table gave a soft warning tone. Caleb straightened as the fragile piece broke. Ranger's eyes fluttered. His body went still in a way that made the whole room hold its breath. Emily moved fast, her voice calm but urgent. Caleb, step back. He did, but only one step. In his fist, Aaron's dog tag pressed hard against his skin. Ranger had carried the truth through the storm. Now the question was whether he had any strength left to stay. Emily moved with the kind of calm that only comes from years of meeting fear at the door and refusing to let it take over the room. Peter, oxygen up. Warm pack on his side. Keep the fluid steady. Her voice did not rise, but everything in the clinic seemed to obey it. The monitor gave another thin warning sound. Ranger's chest lifted once, then paused too long. Caleb stood near the wall with Aaron's dog tag locked inside his fist, every muscle in his body wanting to step forward, every piece of training telling him not to get in the way. Rainwater still dripped from the hem of his shirt onto the tile. He did not feel the cold anymore. He only saw Ranger's eyes, half open and unfocused, and the old canvas bag resting beside the table like a witness that had already said too much. Emily bent close, listening, checking, adjusting the mask near Ranger's muzzle. Come on, Ranger, she said softly. Not after all that. Not now. The dog did not answer. His paw, the same paw that had guarded the bag in the ditch, twitched once against the blanket and then went still. Caleb felt something inside him drop. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was the quiet collapse of a man who had spent 7 years telling himself he could survive not knowing, only to be handed the truth by a dying animal and then watch that truth begin to slip away too. Peter's hands shook as he passed Emily what she needed. He was young enough to still believe every rescue should end the way decent people prayed it would. Emily knew better, but knowing better had not made her heart smaller. It had made her hands gentler. His body is exhausted, she said, not looking away from Ranger. He has been holding on for something. Caleb's voice came out low. For my brother. Emily glanced at him then, only for a second. Maybe for you too. The words hit harder than he expected. Caleb looked down at Aaron's tag. The stamped letters were worn but clear beneath his thumb. Aaron M. Walker. The little brother who used to run ahead of him through summer fields in Ohio, daring Caleb to catch up. The Marine who had called him from training just to describe a stubborn German shepherd that refused to fetch unless the throw was worth his time. The voice that had vanished into storm reports, official letters, and unanswered calls. Caleb had spent years angry at empty roads, angry at paperwork, angry at God in a way he never admitted out loud. And now, in the blue-white light of a small-town veterinary clinic, that missing story had a heartbeat on a steel table. A weak one. A fading one. Emily worked for several minutes that stretched into something outside of time. The machine softened, steadied, then faltered again. Ranger's breathing came shallow. Caleb watched the dog's nose move faintly, searching for a scent that was not quite there. He knew that look. K9 handlers talked about it often. Dogs remembered the world through invisible threads. Sweat, leather, rain, old metal, fear, home. Caleb looked at the tag in his hand, then at his own dog tags hanging against his chest. Slowly, he stepped closer. Emily was about to tell him to wait, but stopped when she saw his face. Not panic, not interference. A decision. Caleb placed Aaron's dog tag on the edge of the table, near Ranger's muzzle. The metal made the smallest sound when it touched the steel. A soft click. Barely anything. But Ranger's ear moved. Emily saw it first. Again, she whispered. Caleb lifted the tag with shaking fingers and set it down once more. Click. Ranger's nostrils opened. A thread of breath pulled in. Thin. Uneven. Real. Caleb leaned closer, his voice breaking into a whisper that belonged more to a chapel than a clinic. Ranger. The dog's eyelids trembled. Ranger, heel. The command seemed to travel through him like a memory waking under snow. His paw flexed beneath the blanket. Peter stopped moving. Emily held the oxygen mask steady, eyes fixed on Ranger's face. Caleb said it again, softer this time. Ranger, heel. For one long second, nothing happened. Then the monitor answered with a single clear beat. Not strong. Not enough to call victory. But there. Caleb shut his eyes. Emily exhaled as if she had been holding her breath for 7 years too. Good boy, she said, and her voice was no longer only a doctor's voice. It was human. Ranger drew another breath. Then another. His eyes opened just enough to find Caleb. The old shepherd did not lift his head. He did not need to. His gaze moved from Aaron's tag to Caleb's face, and the meaning in it was almost too much to bear. I finished the road. I found the bloodline. I gave back what I carried. Caleb placed one hand gently on the blanket near Ranger's shoulder. You did good, Marine, he whispered, though Ranger had never worn the uniform. Some souls did not need one. Emily kept working, adjusting the fluids, checking his pulse again. He is not safe yet, she said. But he came back. Caleb nodded. His eyes stayed on Ranger. That is enough for tonight. Outside, the rain finally slowed to a mist. The parking lot shimmered beneath the clinic lights, and beyond it the church steeple stood pale against the last darkness before dawn. Inside, the room settled into a fragile quiet. Peter brought Caleb a dry towel, but Caleb barely noticed. He sat on the floor beside the exam table because there was nowhere else he could bear to be. Aaron's dog tag rested near Ranger's muzzle. Caleb's own tags lay beside it, two small pieces of metal catching the light together for the first time. Ranger slept in short, uneven breaths, but he slept. Emily pulled a chair close and sat for a moment, her shoulders finally dropping. You should know something, she said. Caleb looked up. A dog in his condition should not have been able to protect that bag for long. Not in this weather. Not alone. Caleb looked at Ranger's paw, still angled toward the canvas even in sleep. He was not alone, he said. Emily followed his gaze to the two dog tags. She did not correct him. The first gray hint of morning touched the clinic window. Caleb watched it brighten the glass and felt, for the first time in years, that the world had not healed, not yet, but it had shifted. Somewhere in the space between loss and breath, between an old command and one returning heartbeat, a door had opened. He did not know what waited on the other side. He only knew Ranger had brought him to it. Morning came softly to Brookhaven, not with warmth, but with a pale gray light that spread across the clinic windows and turned the rain on the glass into thin silver lines. Caleb had not slept. He sat in the same chair beside Ranger's table, elbows on his knees, Aaron's dog tag resting in his open palm while his own tags hung against his chest. The two pieces of metal had touched sometime before dawn, and he had left them that way, not because it made sense, but because separating them felt wrong. Ranger slept under the blankets, his breathing still shallow, but steadier than before. Every few minutes, Caleb counted the rise and fall of his ribs, then looked at the monitor, then back to the dog as if one might betray what the other tried to hide. Dr. Emily Carter returned from the small break room, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. Her hair had loosened around her face, and there were faint shadows beneath her eyes, but her hands were still steady. She placed 1 cup near Caleb without asking if he wanted it. "You need something warm," she said. Caleb wrapped his fingers around the cup, but did not drink. "How is he?" Emily checked Ranger's pulse, lifted one eyelid gently, and listened to his chest. The old shepherd did not wake, but his paw moved toward the canvas bag again, slow and blind with instinct. Emily noticed, still guarding it. Caleb looked at the bag on the counter. They had removed the photograph and dog tag, but the rest remained inside, untouched. "He carried my brother home in pieces," Caleb said. "Maybe there is more." Emily leaned back against the counter, studying him with the careful silence of someone who knew grief could be startled if handled too quickly. "Then open it while he is resting." Caleb stood. His legs felt heavy, as if he had marched through the night instead of sitting still. The canvas bag smelled of rain, old fabric, and something faintly earthy, like it had spent years in sheds, trucks, fields, or places without names. He unfastened the main pocket and began removing its contents one at a time onto a clean towel. A folded strip of Marine Corps cloth, a cracked plastic sleeve with the photograph of Aaron and Ranger, a small training whistle on a frayed cord, a laminated card warped by water. Caleb smoothed it carefully under his palm. The print was faded, but the words were still readable. K-9 transfer record. Handler, Lieutenant Aaron M. Walker. Dog, Ranger. Status, temporary transport. Destination, Mill Creek Field Annex. Caleb looked up slowly. Mill Creek. Emily followed the thought. The old gas station was on Mill Creek Road. Caleb nodded, his jaw tightening. That field annex closed after the storm season years ago. I remember hearing about it. Aaron was supposed to be transferring Ranger for a medical evaluation after a training injury. Then the accident report said the transport route washed out near a creek. He looked back at the bag, but Ranger was found less than 3 miles from that annex. Emily's expression shifted. After 7 years? Caleb did not answer. Some questions were too large for the room. He reached into the side pocket and found a small notebook, its cover curled, pages swollen at the edges. Most of the writing had blurred into blue shadows, but a few lines remained clear. Ranger refuses to leave the east storage shed. Keeps alerting near the floorboards. Will check again after morning inspection. Caleb read the words twice. Then a third time. Aaron's handwriting was unmistakable, slanted slightly right, firm and impatient. The same hand that had once written birthday cards with jokes in the margins. Caleb felt the clinic tilt quietly around him. He wrote this, he said. Emily came closer, reading over his shoulder without touching the page. East storage shed. Caleb's eyes moved to Ranger. The shepherd was still asleep, but his ears had lifted faintly, as if the words had passed through whatever thin place dreams make. The annex had storage buildings, Caleb said. I saw pictures in the old file. Peter entered with fresh towels and stopped when he sensed the change in the room. Is everything okay? Caleb folded the notebook with great care. I do not know yet. Emily's voice was gentle but firm. Caleb, Ranger cannot travel. Not today. Maybe not for several days. I know. And you have been awake all night. I know that too. His voice softened before it could turn sharp. He looked at Ranger, at the gray muzzle, the worn collar, the body that had carried duty far past reason. But he did not drag that bag through the rain just to tell me Aaron had a dog. He was trying to point somewhere. Emily held his gaze, then looked back at the notebook. If you go, you call someone. Sheriff. Military Records Office. Anyone who can meet you there. Caleb nodded. I will. A faint sound came from the table. Ranger had opened his eyes. They were clearer now, still tired, still ringed with pain, but present. His gaze moved from Caleb to the notebook, then to the door. His breath hitched into a soft whine. Not fear. Urgency. Caleb stepped to him immediately. Easy, Ranger. The dog tried to lift his head. Emily placed a hand near his shoulder. No, you stay down. Ranger ignored her as much as his body allowed, nose pointing toward the canvas bag, then toward the window where morning light stretched across the parking lot. Caleb understood before he wanted to. The shepherd was not finished. Whatever had kept him alive in the ditch had not ended with Aaron's dog tag. There was another piece. Another place. Maybe another life waiting beneath old floorboards and 7 years of silence. Caleb placed the notebook beside Ranger's paw. The dog relaxed by less than an inch, but Caleb saw it. Approval. Trust. A handoff. "You want me to go back?" Caleb whispered. Ranger blinked slowly. Emily looked between them, and this time she did not say it was impossible. Some bonds did not ask permission from reason. Caleb put Aaron's tag around his neck beside his own. The two names rested together against his chest. Then he picked up the canvas bag, now lighter, but somehow heavier than before. At the door, he turned back. Ranger watched him from the table, too weak to stand, too loyal to look away. Caleb raised 2 fingers to his brow in a small salute. "I will check the shed," he said, "and I will come back." Ranger's tail moved once beneath the blanket. Outside, the storm had left the town washed clean and trembling. Caleb stepped into the cold morning with the notebook in his pocket, the old bag in his hand, and the strange feeling that he was not following a clue, but a prayer that had taken 7 years to arrive. Caleb drove back toward Mill Creek with the heater on low and the windows fogging at the edges, though the rain had finally passed and the morning sky had opened into a pale, uncertain blue. The road looked different in daylight, but not kinder. Wet fields stretched on both sides, brown and silver under the clouds, broken by old fence lines and bare trees with black branches lifted like hands. The old canvas bag sat on the passenger seat, buckled in without thought, and Aaron's dog tag rested against Caleb's chest beside his own, clicking softly every time the truck rolled over a rough patch of road. It was a small sound, but it filled the cab. Metal against metal, brother against brother. Caleb had called the county sheriff before leaving the clinic, just as Emily had asked, and left a message with the dispatcher about possible evidence connected to an old missing person case. The dispatcher had been polite, careful, uncertain, the way people sounded when grief had paperwork attached to it. She said a deputy would meet him if one was available. Caleb did not wait for certainty. Ranger had not waited 7 years for certainty. He had carried what he could carry and trusted the rest to the next pair of hands. Mill Creek Road narrowed after the town limits, winding past shuttered farmhouses, drainage ditches, and a line of pines that leaned toward the pavement as if listening. Caleb passed the abandoned gas station where he had found Ranger only hours before. In daylight, it looked smaller, less haunted, just a dead building with rusted pumps and weeds growing through the cracks. But the ditch behind it still held the shape of last night. Mud pressed flat where Ranger had lain, a shallow mark where Caleb had knelt, a faint smear leading toward the shoulder, already softening under the morning air. Caleb slowed but did not stop. Not yet. The notebook had said East Storage Shed. The old Mill Creek Field Annex sat another 2.7 miles down the road, hidden behind a sagging chain-link fence and a government sign so faded it looked like a warning from another lifetime. Caleb pulled onto the gravel shoulder and stepped out. The air smelled of wet pine, cold dirt, and old leaves. Somewhere far off, a crow called once, then fell silent. Beyond the fence, 3 low buildings sat in a row, their green paint peeling, their windows clouded by dust and weather. The place had been stripped of purpose. No vehicles, no voices, no flag moving on a pole. Just the hollow quiet of a place where men had once trained dogs to trust commands and then left the echoes behind. Caleb found a gap near the gate where the chain had rusted through. He squeezed inside, the canvas bag over one shoulder, boots sinking into the soaked gravel. The East Storage Shed was easy to identify. It stood apart from the others, closest to the tree line, with one corner bowed from age and a tin roof patched in 3 places. Caleb paused outside the door. For a moment, he was 30 again, standing in a military office while someone told him Aaron's transport had never arrived. He remembered the air conditioner humming too loudly, the smell of cheap coffee, the careful faces, the phrase "search efforts continue," which sounded official enough to hide the truth that nobody knew where to look. He put his hand on Aaron's tag. "All right," he whispered. "Show me what he found." The shed door resisted at first, swollen by rain, then gave way with a tired groan. Inside, the air was cool and stale. Dust clung to empty shelves. Old training cones sat in one corner beside cracked plastic tubs. A faded sign reading canine equipment hung crooked on the back wall. Thin shafts of daylight came through gaps in the boards and fell across the floor in pale stripes. Caleb stood still, listening. Nothing moved. Still, the room did not feel empty. He took out Aaron's notebook and opened to the line he had read at the clinic. Ranger refuses to leave the east storage shed. Keeps alerting near the floorboards. Caleb looked down. The wooden floor was uneven, warped in places by years of moisture. He moved slowly, testing each board with his boot. Near the back corner, below the crooked sign, one plank gave a dull sound instead of a hollow one. Caleb crouched and brushed away dirt with his hand. The boards there were newer than the others, not fresh, but different. Replaced long ago. He found the edge and worked his fingers into the seam. The first board lifted after a struggle. The second came easier. Beneath them was a shallow space lined with old plastic sheeting. Caleb's breath caught, not from fear, but from the sudden sense that he had reached the place Ranger had been pointing to all along. Inside was another bundle, wrapped in a weathered Marine Corps field jacket, carefully folded despite the years. Caleb lifted it into the light and set it on the floor. His hands were steady until he saw the name tape stitched above the pocket. Walker. For a while, he could not move. The shed, the road, the years, all seemed to gather around that single strip of cloth. Then something sounded beneath the floor. Not loud, not clear. A thin, trembling whimper. Caleb froze. He looked toward the open space under the lifted boards. The sound came again, softer than breath. He reached for the flashlight on his belt and angled the beam below the floor. At first, he saw only damp earth and shadows. Then two tiny amber eyes reflected back at him. A German shepherd puppy, no more than a few weeks old, lay curled against the far side of the crawl space, wrapped partly in torn cloth, alive but weak, its small body trembling in the cold. Caleb stared, his heart pounding so hard the dog tags shook against his chest. Ranger had not only guarded Aaron's memory. Ranger had been guarding a life. "Hey, little one," Caleb whispered, lowering himself to the floor. "I found you." The puppy blinked slowly, too tired to be afraid. Caleb reached in with both hands, careful and slow, and lifted the small shepherd into the morning light. It weighed almost nothing, a warm, fragile spark against his palms. The puppy made one faint sound and pressed its nose into the front of Caleb's shirt, right against the two dog tags. Caleb closed his eyes as the truth settled over him with the weight of grace. Ranger had survived the ditch because this little one was still out here. Aaron's jacket had become a shelter. Ranger's bag had become a message. And Caleb, who had come looking for the past, was now holding its living answer. Caleb wrapped the puppy inside Aaron's old field jacket and carried it against his chest, as if the cold morning itself might try to take it back. The little shepherd did not struggle. It made only one small sound, a thin, breathy whimper that seemed too fragile for the wide, empty field around them. Caleb tucked the jacket closer, shielding the pup from the wind that moved through the abandoned annex and rattled the tin roof behind him. "You are all right," he whispered, though he was not sure if he was speaking to the puppy, to Ranger, to Aaron, or to the part of himself that had been standing in that shed for 7 years without knowing it. He stepped carefully across the wet gravel toward the truck, the canvas bag slung over one shoulder, the notebook in his pocket, and the two dog tags resting warm beneath the puppy's cheek. Just as he reached the gate, a county cruiser rolled in slowly from Mill Creek Road, tires crunching over loose stone. The deputy who stepped out was a woman in her 40s with fair skin, tired brown eyes, and a rain jacket zipped to her throat. Her nameplate read Morris. She took in the scene without rushing it. The deserted annex, the open shed, the Marine holding a bundle against his chest like a newborn, and the look on Caleb's face that said the morning had already delivered more than words could hold. "Staff Sergeant Walker?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes moved to the jacket. The puppy's small nose appeared from the fold, damp and trembling. Deputy Morris softened immediately. "Good Lord," she murmured. "Is that what you found?" Caleb looked down at the tiny shepherd. "Part of it." He explained only what he could say without breaking the fragile order of the moment. "The old case. Aaron. Ranger. The notebook. The floorboards." Deputy Morris listened with the stillness of someone trained to separate fact from feeling, yet unable to ignore when both arrived carrying the same name. She followed him back to the shed and stood at the doorway while he showed her the lifted boards, the hidden space, the field jacket, and the place where the puppy had been tucked away from the cold. She did not touch anything at first. She only removed her hat and held it in both hands. 7 years, she said quietly. Caleb nodded. 7 years. The words hung there between them, not as a complaint, not as an accusation, just the measurement of a road no one should have had to walk. Deputy Morris called it in, requesting an evidence team and animal welfare support, her voice professional again, but lower than before. Caleb waited near the truck with the puppy tucked inside his coat. The little dog had begun to breathe more steadily, warmed by body heat and the layered fabric that once belonged to Aaron. Caleb opened the passenger door and set the pup gently on the seat, keeping one hand beneath it. The puppy turned its face toward the canvas bag and gave a weak, searching sniff. The same motion Ranger had made at the clinic. The same invisible thread. Caleb's throat tightened. You know him too, do you? The puppy blinked, then tucked its nose against the dog tags. Caleb did not wait for the evidence team. Deputy Morris understood. Go, she said. Get that pup to the clinic. I will secure the shed. Caleb looked back once at the east storage building, at the doorway dark against the pale morning. It no longer looked abandoned. It looked emptied, as if whatever had been trapped there had finally been released into daylight. The drive back to Brookhaven felt longer than before. Caleb kept one hand on the wheel and one hand resting lightly near the puppy, feeling each tiny breath through the jacket. The old road passed in blurred strips of pine, field, fence, and sky. At the abandoned gas station, he slowed again. This time he stopped for only a moment. The ditch where Ranger had lain was quiet. Morning light touched the wet grass. Caleb looked at it and saw not a place of suffering, but a threshold. Ranger had crawled as far as his body could carry him, then waited there until the right headlights found him. Caleb drove on. When he pulled beneath the clinic awning, Emily was already at the door, as if some part of her had expected him before the truck appeared. Her face changed when she saw the bundle. Caleb. He stepped out and opened the jacket enough for her to see. The puppy gave a faint squeak, no louder than a hinge in the wind. Emily covered her mouth for half a second, then the doctor and her returned. Inside. Now. The clinic came alive again, but gently. Warm towels. Glucose. A small heating pad. A careful examination beneath soft light. Peter whispered encouragement under his breath, while Emily checked the puppy from nose to tail with hands that knew how to be both quick and kind. Caleb stood beside Ranger's table, holding the empty field jacket. Ranger was awake now. Weak, but awake. His amber eyes tracked Caleb the moment he entered. Then his gaze shifted to the towel in Emily's hands. The puppy. Ranger lifted his head an inch. It cost him something. Everyone saw it. Easy, Emily said, but Ranger did not settle. The sound that came from him was low and broken, not alarm, not pain, but recognition sharpened by need. Caleb stepped closer to the puppy and touched its small back with one finger. He found the shed, he told Ranger softly. And I found what you were guarding. Emily finished wrapping the puppy in a clean blanket and looked at Caleb. Bring it over. Caleb lifted the pup with both hands and carried it to Ranger's table. For a moment, the room held perfectly still. Then the puppy stirred at the scent of the old dog and made a tiny cry. Ranger's whole face changed. The years fell away. The exhaustion did not vanish, but something stronger rose through it. He stretched his muzzle toward the puppy, slow and trembling, and touched the little one's head with his nose. The puppy quieted instantly. Caleb felt the moment enter him like light through a cracked wall. Ranger closed his eyes and breathed in the pup's scent as if counting every heartbeat, every promise, every mile. Emily turned away slightly, blinking hard. Peter did not even try to hide his tears. Caleb placed Aaron's field jacket at the edge of the table, near both dogs. Ranger opened his eyes again and looked at Caleb. This time there was no plea in them, no warning, only release. Caleb understood. The mission had changed hands. He rested his palm on Ranger's shoulder, careful around the blankets and lines. You did not fail him, Caleb whispered. You did not fail either of them. Ranger exhaled, long and soft, and the puppy nestled against the warmth beneath his chin. Outside, the sun finally broke through the last gray cloud over Brookhaven, laying a pale gold stripe across the clinic floor. It touched Aaron's jacket first, then the 2 dog tags on Caleb's chest, then Ranger's tired face. No one spoke. Some moments were too holy for language, and this was one of them. By noon, the clinic had grown quiet in the way small places do after a storm has passed, and everyone inside knows something has changed. The rain clouds had moved east, leaving Brookhaven under a clean winter light that made the wet sidewalks shine and the bare trees look almost silver. Inside Carter Animal Emergency, the air smelled of warm towels, antiseptic, and coffee that had gone cold in paper cups no one remembered pouring. Ranger slept with the puppy tucked close beneath his chin, both of them wrapped in blankets, both breathing in rhythms that did not match but somehow belonged together. Caleb sat beside them, one hand resting near Ranger's shoulder, the other holding Aaron's field jacket folded across his knees. He had been awake for more than 30 hours, but sleep felt far away, something from a life that had not yet heard this story. Emily moved through the room softly, checking monitors, adjusting heat, writing notes with careful precision. She had named the puppy female after the examination, no more than 4 weeks old, underweight but stronger than she looked. When she told Caleb, he let out a breath he had not known he was holding. "A girl," he said. Emily nodded. "A fighter." Caleb looked at Ranger. "She comes by it honestly." The old dog's ears twitched at his voice, but his eyes stayed closed. Every time the puppy shifted, Ranger found her with his nose, guiding her back into warmth without fully waking. It was instinct, yes, but also more than instinct. It was duty softened into tenderness. Deputy Morris returned in the early afternoon with mud on her boots and a folder tucked beneath one arm. Her face carried the careful gravity of someone arriving with answers that would not make the past easier, only clearer. Caleb met her in the small waiting area while Emily stayed with the dogs. The deputy removed her hat and held it against her chest. "The shed is secured," she said. "County evidence team is processing what we found." There were old records in a rusted lockbox under the same floor section. Training logs, weather reports, some personal effects. "It looks like your brother may have been trying to document that the route was unsafe after repeated flooding." Caleb listened without moving. The words entered slowly, like light reaching the bottom of deep water. Was there anything else? Deputy Morris opened the folder and slid out a sealed plastic sleeve. Inside was a small photograph, edges curled from age but protected well enough to survive. Aaron stood beside Ranger near the annex, smiling with one hand raised as if he had been caught mid-wave. At his feet, in the shade of the east shed, was a young female German shepherd, calm and watchful. Caleb stared at the image. "Who was that?" Deputy Morris looked toward the treatment room. There was a kennel record. Her name was Mercy. She was assigned temporarily at the annex during the same transfer week. Caleb looked through the doorway at the puppy sleeping against Ranger. The answer did not need to be spoken all at once. Mercy had been part of the hidden story too. Another life tied to the shed, the storm, the long silence. Maybe Ranger had stayed near that place for years because everything he had lost was buried there in scent and memory. Maybe the puppy had come from a line that should have vanished but had not. Deputy Morris continued gently. "There will be more to learn. I do not want to guess before the records are reviewed. But I can tell you this. Your brother was still doing his job when he wrote those notes. He was paying attention. He was trying to protect whoever came after him." Caleb nodded once. His throat tightened around words that could not find shape. For years, he had imagined Aaron's last hours as confusion, darkness, accident, disappearance. Now he could see something else. Aaron noticing a weak floor. Aaron writing a warning. Aaron trusting Ranger. Aaron leaving behind not an ending, but a trail. Deputy Morris placed a hand lightly on the folder. "I am sorry it took this long." Caleb looked at her, and for the first time, the apology did not feel empty. He had Ranger, he said. Maybe that is why he was not completely lost. The deputy's eyes softened. Maybe not. When Caleb returned to the treatment room, Emily was sitting beside Ranger with the puppy asleep in her palm, wrapped like a tiny loaf of bread in a white towel. "She needs a name," Emily said. Caleb stopped at the edge of the table. Naming felt sudden, dangerous, like accepting responsibility before knowing if his heart could bear it. The puppy opened her eyes, dark blue still clouded with infancy, and gave one small squeak. Ranger stirred, lifted his head barely an inch, and looked at Caleb. There was exhaustion in that gaze, but no fear. Only expectation. Caleb thought of Aaron's photograph, of the old field jacket, of a dog crossing 7 years of silence to keep one last promise alive. He thought of the way the puppy had pressed her nose against the 2 dog tags, breathing in a family she had never met and somehow already belonged to. "Hope," Caleb said. The word came out soft, almost surprised by itself. Emily smiled through tired eyes. "Hope Walker has a nice sound to it." Caleb almost corrected her, almost said he had not decided anything. But Ranger's tail moved beneath the blanket, a slow, deliberate thump against the table padding. Once, then again. Emily looked at Caleb as if the matter had been settled by a higher authority. Caleb reached out and touched the puppy's head with one finger. Her fur was warm now, softer than he expected, with a faint dark stripe along her back like a shadow that had chosen to become light. "All right," he whispered. "Hope." Ranger lowered his head again, satisfied, and the puppy curled against him as if the name had been waiting there all along. Later, when the sun began to dip behind the church steeple across the street, Caleb stepped outside for the first breath of air that was not clinic air. The town was quiet. A flag moved gently in front of the sheriff's office down the block. Somewhere, a bell rang the hour. Caleb held Aaron's dog tag in one hand and his own in the other, letting the chains hang between his fingers. For 7 years, one name had meant absence. Now it meant direction, not closure. That word was too clean for grief. But direction was enough. Behind him, through the clinic window, Ranger slept beside Hope under the warm yellow light. Caleb watched them and understood something he could not have understood the night before. Rescue was not always a hand reaching down. Sometimes rescue was a trail left by the wounded, a bag guarded in the rain, a heartbeat returning for one more duty, a tiny life hidden beneath floorboards until love arrived with muddy boots and shaking hands. Caleb placed both dog tags back against his chest and went inside. Ranger opened one eye when he entered, as if counting him among those under his protection now. Caleb sat beside him and lowered his voice. "You brought them back to me," he said. Ranger breathed out slowly. Hope slept on, tucked safely between the old dog and the folded jacket. And in that small room, under the soft hum of the clinic lights, Caleb felt the first quiet stitch close inside a wound he had stopped expecting to heal. 3 weeks later, the sky over Quantico National Cemetery was clear and blue, the kind of blue that makes silence feel larger. A soft wind moved across the rows of white headstones and lifted the edge of the folded flag resting on the small memorial table beneath the oak tree. Caleb stood in his dress blues with Aaron's dog tag in one gloved hand and his own dog tags tucked beneath his jacket, close to his heart. He had worn uniforms at funerals before. He had stood straight while rifles cracked in the distance, while chaplains spoke, while families held each other with the stunned tenderness of people learning how heavy absence could be. But this was different. There was no casket, no clean ending, only a name returned from the dark by a dog who had refused to forget. Ranger sat beside Caleb's left leg on a soft service mat Emily had insisted they bring, his body still thin but stronger now, his sable coat brushed, his old working collar cleaned and repaired with a small silver tag that read Ranger Walker. He could not sit for long, but he sat straight for this. His ears were lifted. His amber eyes watched the flag as if he understood duty better than anyone there. Beside him, wrapped in a small cream blanket in Emily's arms, Hope slept with one paw tucked beneath her chin, unaware of the uniformed Marines, the chaplain, Deputy Morris, Peter, and the few old service members who had come after hearing that Lieutenant Aaron Walker's effects had finally been recovered. Emily stood near Caleb, fair-skinned and quiet, her dark blonde hair pinned neatly back, her eyes soft from too little sleep and too much feeling. She had driven Ranger and Hope all the way from Brookhaven because Caleb had asked, and because Ranger had lifted his head at the sound of Aaron's name as if attendance was not optional. The chaplain spoke gently, his voice carried by the wind. He did not try to explain pain. He did not dress mystery in easy words. He simply honored a Marine who had done his duty, a brother who had waited, an AK-9 who had carried a promise farther than anyone could measure. Caleb heard only pieces. Service, faithfulness, returned home. Not all miracles arrive loudly. Some come limping out of the rain. His throat tightened at that. Ranger's nose lifted slightly, catching a scent on the air, perhaps the grass, the flag, the old leather of Caleb's gloves, or some memory no human language could enter. When the chaplain finished, He nodded to Caleb. For a moment, Caleb did not move. Then he stepped forward and placed Aaron's dog tag beneath the folded flag. The metal settled against the wood with a quiet sound. Not final. True. Caleb looked down at the name stamped into it and saw not the years lost, but the road that had brought it back. A road through stormwater and old floorboards, through a canvas bag guarded by a dying shepherd, through a puppy hidden under Aaron's jacket, through the hands of people who chose to stop instead of passing by. I brought him home, Caleb said, barely above a whisper. Ranger stood then. Slowly, painfully. Emily started to reach for him, but Caleb lifted one hand, asking her to wait. The old German shepherd took one step toward the table, then another. His paws moved over the grass with solemn effort until he reached the folded flag. He lowered his head and touched his nose to the edge of Aaron's dog tag. No one spoke. Even Hope stirred in Emily's arms, opening her tiny eyes as if the silence had called her too. Caleb knelt beside Ranger, one knee in the grass, his polished shoe sinking slightly into the damp earth. He placed his hand on Ranger's back and felt the old dog's breath move under his palm. You kept your post, he whispered. Ranger leaned gently against him. It was not much. Just the weight of a tired dog resting against a man who had finally stopped standing alone. But it broke something open in the people watching. Deputy Morris wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. Peter bowed his head. Emily held Hope closer, and the puppy gave one small sound, soft as a prayer beginning. After the ceremony, the Marines offered handshakes, careful words, and quiet respect. Caleb accepted them, but his eyes kept returning to Ranger, who had settled in the grass beside the memorial table, watching Hope sleep in Emily's arms. The puppy had gained weight over the last 3 weeks. Her fur had begun to shine, sable with a dark line along her back, and her paws were already too big for her little body. Emily had laughed once and said she would grow into trouble. Caleb had answered that trouble seemed to run in the family. When the crowd thinned, Caleb remained beneath the oak tree. The folded flag had been placed in his arms. Aaron's tag hung now on a separate chain, not to be worn as a wound, but kept as a witness. Emily stepped beside him and handed Hope over. The puppy nestled instantly against Caleb's chest, nose pressing into the front of his uniform where his own dog tags rested unseen. Ranger looked up, saw the puppy safe, and gave a slow blink. Caleb smiled for the first time that day. You approve? Ranger's tail brushed the grass once. Emily laughed softly, then covered it with her hand as if laughter felt too bright for a cemetery. Caleb did not mind. Maybe brightness belonged there too. Maybe grief was not offended by joy when joy came gently. He looked across the headstones, past the flags, past the road leading out of the cemetery, and thought of the night at the abandoned gas station. How close he had come to driving by. How one glance, one pair of amber eyes, one small decision to stop had changed the shape of everything that followed. He had thought he was saving a dog. In truth, Ranger had been saving him from a life where Aaron remained only a missing name and Hope stayed buried under old boards. Caleb lowered his face to Hope's head and breathed in the warm puppy smell of milk, blankets, and new beginnings. Ranger leaned against his leg. The folded flag rested in his arms. The wind moved softly through the oak leaves above them. Some stories do not end with answers. Some end with a man kneeling in the grass, an old canine finally allowed to rest, and a puppy sleeping where sorrow used to live. Caleb looked down at Ranger and whispered, "Let us go home." This time, home did not mean the place he had left. It meant the place they would build. A quiet house with a porch, a repaired collar by the door, a field where Hope would learn to run, a place where Aaron's photograph would catch the morning light, and Ranger would sleep beneath it knowing the mission was complete. As Caleb walked back toward the truck, Ranger moved slowly beside him, Hope safe in his arms, and the cemetery behind them settled into peace. No thunder answered. No great sign split the sky. Only sunlight warmed the wet grass, and 3 shadows moved together across the road, no longer lost, no longer waiting, carried forward by the smallest mercy that had saved them all.